You are listening to Action Design, your monthly insight into the field of behavioral economics and its applications to the world around us. We bring you leading practitioners from all industries to discuss cutting-edge behavioral research and how to practically apply those concepts to the development of consumer products and public policy.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Action Design Radio. I am here, Eric Johnson, your host, with my co-host, as always, Zarak Khan.
Hello.
Hello, Zarak. How are you today?
I am doing great. I'm particularly excited for this episode because I love crossover episodes. I think we might have talked about this a couple months ago, but I feel like this is like Scooby-Doo meets Abbott and Costello, or like one of those old cartoon crossovers. There's probably a better reference than that, but I can't think of it right now.
One of the greatest crossovers of all time. Yeah, this has been a long time in the making. We're excited to have the hosts of another fantastic behavioral science podcast, Behavioral Gurus. We have Kurt Nelson and Tim Houlihan joining us. So how are you guys doing today?
Good to go. Good to be here. Yeah, thanks, Zarak. Thanks, Eric.
Yeah. Super excited to be here. It is crossover day.
Time. Yeah, no, we did a crossover on your guys' show. Man, when was that? Was that fall of last year at this point? It feels like time. I've totally lost track of time through everything that's been going on. But yeah, we always knew we wanted to do return the favor and get on this one. So excited to be finally doing it.
We are excited to talk to you and to all your listeners. So we're excited as well.
And that was
awesome.
Fun. I can only imagine that this will be equally as fun. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. So I think while we get started, why don't you just do a quick introduction to yourselves? Tell us a little bit about, who you are, what you do, and about the show a little bit. Then we'll start going a little bit more details of the background.
All right. So this is Kurt. And so just a little bit, I'm a behavioral scientist, have my PhD in IO Psych, have been working in the industry for, 25 years now. Kind of got interested in this. I've always been interested in what makes people tick, right? Why we do what we do. But I really got interested in this when I was getting my MBA. Had always loved social psychology courses, all of that kind of stuff. But in my MBA, I actually took a consumer behavior course, and it was a PhD level course, and the course was all about reading research papers and then summarizing those findings and doing that. And as I was reading these consumer behavior research papers, you're finding out, wow, this seems really weird. Why would people buy more just because it's priced at $3.99 as opposed to priced at $4, and all of the different facets that go into that. So that really kind of triggered me to be thinking about this more. And so when I had the opportunity after starting my own behavioral consultancy company way back 22 years ago, ended up going back and getting my PhD in this. And as they say, the rest is history. And I'll let Tim talk a little bit about his background, and then we can share our little goofy story about how we started a podcast, the great strategic thinking that we did in order to really do that, which is absolutely a total lie.
Oh, absolutely. It's always very strategic, right?
Yeah.
Well, this is Tim Houlihan, and much like Kurt, I don't think I remember hearing that part of the story, Kurt, from you. But when I was in college and undergrad, I had my microeconomics class right before my consumer behavior class, which was basically consumer marketing at the time. And in economics, it was all about, supply and demand curves and finding equilibrium and all this rational actor stuff. And then I go into the next class, which was all about people responding to a 15% off coupon pretty well, but responding to a 30% off coupon a lot more. And it's like, well, wait a minute, there's some irrationality to some of this stuff. And so that, I think that planted a seed, but it wasn't until years later when I actually started working in the world of incentives that really kind of hooked me. It was like, wait a minute. There is a difference in the way people will perform depending on how the rules are written and what kind of rewards are offered. And that really struck a core.
So it's interesting. I mean, I hear a common theme both between the two of you, and it's something that I think is shared with many, if not everyone that I know in behavioral science, which is just kind of curiosity. You know, a lot of times it starts with just people who are interested and notice something, and they're like, well, that's like, what's going on there? You know, like that's something kind of weird. I'm curious though, you know, Kurt, you mentioned that you started this consultancy 22 years ago. You know, I'm interested in how you've seen kind of things change. I mean, we were chatting with someone the other day where we were like, oh, like the past 5 years, it's changed so much. But like, I mean, how are you talking about it? You know, when you were positioning your consultancy a couple decades ago, you know, were people using different language? Were you having to kind of position yourself differently? What was the reception like?
Yeah, it's interesting. When we think about how the changes happen, there has been a lot of change in the research. We found out a lot more. There's more stuff going on. Where I have seen the difference, and this is working with businesses, is the acceptance from business about the value that behavioral science can bring in. Now, again, when I was starting, behavioral economics wasn't a buzzword that was out there. Behavioral science, nonetheless, people knew about psychology and social psychology and sociology, but those were things that you treated individuals for, right? And they weren't about business per se. Now, there were pockets within that, but I would say one of the biggest pieces of this is that leaders are actually reading some of the popular press out there, the Richard Thaler's Nudge, the Danny Kahneman Thinking Fast and Slow, and they're taking that information and saying, how can we apply this to our world? And so it offers up, it opens up the door sometimes. I will say, you know, I'm not a big fan of Dan Pink's Drive, which was a big book, I don't know however many years ago. I think he left out a lot of different pieces and very cherry picked some of the data on it. I will say that Drive has gotten me, has gotten the business that we have lots of introductions into executive suites, because executives read that book and they're looking at this and saying, all right, so what's more? And oh, you come in and you're talking about that same thing. So I think there's been a bigger acceptance of this within the organizational world, within business itself. I think the science itself has shifted too. I think there are some aspects of the science where we're looking at things with a different lens. We're looking at the human emotional components and how choice architecture, how we are emotional creatures, the loss aversion aspects of this that are playing out in more specific, actionable ways as opposed to theoretical ways. We're having more field research going on, and you're actually getting to see how you can apply some of these theories in real life. And so that's where I think the research side of this has changed, is the applications are being much more real and field experiments are being much more touted.
Yeah, I'm curious, Tim, to get your take on it as well. And then I have sort of a follow-up question specifically on value and those kind of field research experiments.
Mm.
Yeah, I don't know if I can speak to a tremendous amount of change other than seeing an openness and a willingness to accept the way science gets talked about in in boardrooms and the VPs of marketing and HR, that they're starting to see that you can get good results by applying behavioral science. Sales leaders can improve sales better, more effectively with applied behavioral science. Marketing professionals, of course, advertising has always been using behavioral science, whether they knew it or not, right? But now there's more science behind it, and so maybe it's just a little bit more out of the shadows and into the light.
Yeah, you kind of touched actually on what I was thinking as Kurt was answering, which is, to what extent you think that it's the popularity of this and sort of like more of a spotlight on it, both through kind of like awards, right? A couple of Nobel Prizes, things like that, as well as, popular books versus, Kurt used the word value and Tim, you used the word science. And like, I think a lot of what we do is using the science to kind of prove the value of it, right? So you see way more experimentation as opposed to just sort of people aren't, I think, satisfied by just sort of saying like, well, here's a behavioral concept and just you should use it and it'll be better. So to what extent do you think that it's kind of motivated or you get a better reception based on people's just kind of familiarity with the topics and interest versus that it's actually they are expecting you to kind of show demonstrable results? Kurt, maybe I'll start with you.
Yeah, so it's a really good question because I think there's probably both, right? I think there is this willingness to engage because it has become popular, because there is the awards, as you said, a couple Nobel Prizes and best-selling books out there. So I think the acceptance of it has gotten bigger. But to what Tim was saying is that there are these aspects of showing results, and the idea that you can bring science into these typically boardroom discussions or even specific actions around marketing or internal incentives, different pieces, and apply a behavioral lens, and you can get better results from that, and you can showcase that. And Zarak, to your point, it's this idea that we are now doing experiments, right? And I believe Tim mentioned this too. He said, we've been doing this stuff forever. We just didn't call it what it was. Advertising has been using psychology and behavioral science principles since the dawn of time, is when they started working on it. They just didn't necessarily call it that or think about it in a scientific way. And now they're just putting some of the rigor behind it. And I think organizations internally are doing the same thing. We're doing a lot of work internally with organizations about understanding how to engage and motivate their employees. And you're applying some of these aspects. One thing I didn't mention last time is, is always difficult in the past, right? As we're trying to get people to try to do a random control study, right? Nobody wanted to do a random control study or even a control study. It's like you just have to implement it and then run with, do a comparison against what you did last quarter. And you're going, yeah, but that's not apples to apples. And so you need to do a control study. And so you'd always have to maybe try to do a pilot or call it something else in order to get it in. I have seen in the past 3 years, more companies willing to, all right, let's run a control study. Let's run an experiment on it. And so the willingness for them to do that, I think, has been big on this too.
Well, at the same time, I just want to jump in to say that there's been a lot of misfires with books like Drive, or even people who have read, Thinking Predictably Irrational. Dan's book. You just go, man, they got a little bit of the idea, and so they expect somebody like us, the four of us, to walk into a room and the executive explains the situation and then says, okay, so now what do we do? Like,
how do we nudge ourselves out of this? And you're going, yeah.
I love the idea of loss.
Give us the magic behavioral dust to sprinkle on this problem, please. Yeah.
And or you do something and you get a little incremental gain, and they're going, but this was supposed to change the entire way that we operate and the outcomes that we have, and you're going, that's not how this works.
Yeah, I've definitely seen a lot of that as well, and I think maybe we can loop that experience back, and let's shift gears and talk a little bit about the podcast. So, like, you've talked a little bit about how you kind of got into behavioral science over time and what your experience has been like, and what you've been doing lately and how you've seen that change. So, how did that lead to the podcast, and how did you guys decide to come together and do a podcast on this topic through all that sort of stuff?
Well, we did a random control study.
Same here, actually. Funny enough.
Our data, we had a really strong R factor on this, and
statistically significant. We said that we're just going to go for it. Yeah.
We p-hacked the whole thing, so it didn't really matter.
It came from a desire to expand the story. Like, how could we engage more people in applying behavioral science? That was really the impetus of what can we do. And the first idea that came from that was, let's start a meetup. And we didn't realize that action design has already had world domination at this point. Like, we
would have happily teamed up if we would have known. Yeah.
I know we were so naive. We're like, well, let's just start something. Not even thinking to ask, well, what else is out there? That was kind of foolish. But the day that we're going to have our second meetup it was with James Heyman, who, co-authored one of my favorite studies with Dan Ariely on the Tale of Two Markets. And we're going to have Dan in a meetup, and we only had 25 people signed up. We're like, this is insane. We can't just let this go to 25 people. And Kurt had just been on a radio show. He'd just been interviewed like that day or the day before or something.
A couple weeks before. But, the idea here is then Tim is a recording, artist. He does music. He has all this recording equipment. Let's marry those two things together. We'll call James Heyman in an hour before the meetup, and we'll just record a podcast. It's easy. No worries. We'll just record it.
Or
boom,
not of
put it out.
necessity in some ways.
Yeah. And thus the podcast was born. And we truly thought that it would just be an ancillary to the meetup, where every month we would have the speaker come in an hour early. We'd do a 45-minute conversation with them, and then we'd publish that one thing, and that was all, because we didn't want to take on a lot more work. We needed it to be easy and various different things. And then, I don't know, Tim, what changed?
Fast forward to reality. And things changed totally, because we fell in love with it. We absolutely fell in love with podcasting, and all of the learning and all of the great people that we could talk to, and how it expanded our own networks of community was it's almost like a drug, I mean, it's really, it's that enjoyable. It drives that much dopamine in my brain. I can say that.
Well, and I feel like you have an unfair advantage in podcasting in that you guys have excellent voices, I think, for podcasts.
Made for radio. Yeah.
Whenever I hear your voices, I'm like, oh man, it's like a cup of like hot chocolate or something. It's like you guys have such comforting voices to listen to. Which I hope you take as a compliment.
The cup of hot chocolate voice. I've never would have, named my voice that way, but I know that's Tim's voice, but not my own. I think we all have that thing, though. We hear our own voices, and when we listen back to it, and you're going, I'm
still not used to it. I don't think I'll ever get used to it. It's so awkward.
That's a podcasting thing, right? I think it's anybody that's in recording. It's like, why my voice sounds shrill and ugly and
Well, I will say I have kind of gotten used to hearing mine now, and I think that's even weirder, because now because it's sort of like you can pretend to be humble when you're like, I hate hearing my own voice, but then if you're like, I love the sound of my own voice, you sound like a lunatic.
Damn, I sound good. Yeah.
I'm not saying I love the sound of my own voice, but I'm at least comfortable with the sound of my own voice at this point.
And today, also looking good. So,
why? Thank you.
Yeah. Hey, everyone else is trying to catch up with your beard game through quarantine, because we can't, so you were ahead of the curve on that one, at least.
But unfair advantages. Oh my God.
Yeah. Well, I'll take this as another opportunity to plug our not yet sponsor, but maybe it's a someday sponsor, Cowboy Magic, the leave-in beard conditioner that I use. That's made for show ponies. So, Cowboy Magic, get in touch.
We're here.
There you go.
We're ready. We're ready to do ad reads for you.
So you guys fell in love with podcasting, and then, I mean, you've been prolific. I mean, we talked kind of early on when you were thinking about, in-person events and podcasting. And I remember kind of a conversation where you were like, you know what, I think we're really going to go kind of all in on podcasting. We found that we love it. And I mean, you've produced over 100. You had a huge audience for your 100th recording. You did like live in a theater, which is awesome. You've got like, I don't know, like 150, 125, some even more than that. How many have you done so far?
Well, we have Behavioral Grooves, which we have 140 some episodes, and then because we're just stupid and idiotic and want the pain of doing this, we started a second podcast called Weekly Grooves, which I think now we're up to 20 episodes, somewhere close to there.
Yeah.
So 160 plus. So I mean, if you were to just kind of sum up all of those into just like a couple sentences for folks, like what would you say?
A grand theory of life based on podcasting. Yeah.
really concisely, so he should probably answer this.
Oh, thank you to throw me under the bus. This is how we work, right? This is the way that we operate. It's like, yeah, no, you take the tough questions, and then I'm going to sit back and get the easy softballs. So actually, I think it's we're laughing about this, but there is something to be said. We're interviewing people about behavioral science, and I think the real thing about behavioral science is that we're human creatures, that we are infinitely complex, that the elements that we are emotional, that we don't always act in a rational best interest economic perspective, but maybe it's in the best interest of our emotional sanctity, is really what's underlying most of this. It's underlying this idea that as people, as humans, we are so much more diverse, context specific, environmentally influenced, that it's just we could go on and on and on. This is a subject that will never get boring, that we'll never fully understand. And the more that we can find out about ourselves, the better that we hopefully can be in understanding how we can positively apply that both to our life as well as to work.
Yeah, I really like that. I mean, I often kind of describe behavioral science as a prism through which you can view lots of things. And so, yeah, I mean, like, there's an infinite number of podcasts out there that you could have, I'm sure.
Well, and one of the fun things that we do is we occasionally get what we call an accidental behavioral scientist. So as we talked about earlier, advertising agencies have been doing this for years, and they just haven't realized that what they're doing. And I think there's a lot of people out there that are doing great behavioral science work, but they don't have the behavioral science background or the language to be able to really identify that and know that that's what they're doing. But we can talk to them, and then we have what we call a grooving session after our interview with people, where it's just Tim and me grooving on what we heard, and we can then dissect that from a behavioral lens, that behavioral prism, as you're talking about, Zarak. So I think those are really interesting pieces as we can move forward.
How do you identify accidental behavioral scientists? I'm assuming they don't realize that and come to you. So you must have seen their work somewhere or thought of an industry or something like that?
Yeah, we have to pay attention. I mean, and I don't, forgive me if that sounds, whatever that sounds like. I think you just have to pay attention. And you hear people talking about the kind of work they're doing. Like we met a guy who is based in Minneapolis who does free bikes for kids. And he said, one of the biggest things I learned is that, we've got a whole warehouse full of bikes. And when we bring these kids in from poor families, and they're walking through, we don't take them through the whole warehouse. It's too much. He said, so we only show them 4 bikes. Like, oh my gosh, that's choice architecture. Bing. And Terry was a terrific guest because he actually employed a lot of behavioral science tools. My other favorite accidental behavioral science was Rob Burnett from Africa. He's in Nairobi, and he runs a nonprofit, and he's trying to figure out how to influence kids in Nairobi to reduce the birth rate through social media. And so he's using social proof and social norms constantly and just doing a brilliant job of it. And of course, he doesn't think of it as behavioral science, but but between the time that we met him and the time that we actually interviewed him, he talked to some folks at Loyola University and started gathering data. And it's like, oh my gosh, this is a terrific experiment. So I think part of it is just staying aware. It's just having your ears open, being curious, getting back to what you said earlier, Z.
Yeah, so I mean, building on that and how much you've learned from like accidental behavioral scientists and all these people you've talked to over these kind of almost 150 episodes now, something like that. And again, you guys have a lot of experience in this field over a long period of time, but like, how has maybe your perspective changed on behavioral science since you started the podcast? Like, is there anything that has been surprising or that you've sort of like has changed your thinking around the field after having so many conversations with such a diverse group of people doing it, whether intentionally or accidentally?
So I'll take a first stab at this. I think one of the things from my perspective is this idea of learning from failure. And we interviewed Michael Halsworth, who just talked about this idea. And I think, Zarak, it goes back to what you were talking about, even organizations putting in experiments and not just running with, well, here's this insight, and now this applies to everybody across the board, is this idea of having the insight to understand that so much of this is contextually based. And, the concept that Michael brought up was this: they had done these work for governments and various different things about the letters that go out to get people to respond and different things, and about how to simplify those and add graphics and do all of these things. And the response rate, goes up significantly, and not significantly, but enough that it's huge given the numbers of people that are involved in this. And they had done it, I forget if it was in New York City, in Washington, D.C., but then they went and they ran and they did this thing in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And they thought, well, this is a slam dunk, right? This is how it's all worked great before. And they did it. And luckily, he said, we did 9 iterations of this, and one of them being kind of the control. And he said, it failed miserably. The control outperformed everything else, which was the old boring letter piece. And so it's finding the insights from the failures. And he said, so what was fascinating about that now is, let's look and understand, why didn't this work when it worked before? What was the contextual difference? What was that little nuance that made this not work? And what could we do in order to, and what was the insight we can gain from that?
I would add to that, and this is something that Erik and Zarak, I know that you guys have talked to guests about this in the past, and so I'm kind of bouncing back something that's already been on Action Design, but it's a need to do a better job of integrating neuroscience with economics, with psychology. We talk about the confluence of behavioral science as being inclusive of all those things, but I don't really think that we've done a really good job of really deeply integrating it. And I think that there's a real opportunity there. The more that I learn about behavioral science, the more I feel like we could do a better job of doing that integration.
Yeah, it's interesting. We just actually are, and we just released,
timing,
question mark, depending on when these are released. But we just interviewed somebody, a neuroscientist, kind of talking about that topic exactly. And it's something that we've kind of been thinking about too, is it was sort of built into the DNA of action design, which was that it's sort of meant to be kind of an umbrella, sort of a big tent, and there's lots of skill sets and bodies of knowledge and expertise that can be brought to bear on these problems. One thing I'm kind of curious to get your take on is, and I think this is kind of a hard question, so it's okay if you don't have a good answer, because I don't know that anyone has a good answer, but
brace yourselves.
Tim, you got this one.
Yeah, I'll defer to you.
So, when you talk about like the example from BIT in Albuquerque, and like, okay, let's go back and look at the contextual factors that might have, allowed this intervention to work here and then not work somewhere else. That's something that I think, it's almost kind of like level 2 behavioral science, right? Level 1's like, here's all these things you can do and look, and you just change the default and everyone does it now and whatever. Level 2 is like, oh, well, nope, like you have to test and you have to whatever, because it's different. And, I have been looking at like lots of different sort of models and processes for applying behavioral science, right? And so they all kind of, broadly, they are very similar, right? And so it's like you kind of understand a problem, you do some research, you design some intervention, you test it, and you scale it, right? And so there are variations on that, and some people do more in one area, and they break it out a little bit more, but broadly, that's generally what they look like. There is this step in there, and I think this kind of gets to like the Albuquerque thing a little bit, but not even to single them out because it kind of happens in every project, but there is a phase where you have to decide what you're going to try. And you kind of do that based on like expertise a little bit, based on like historical data a little bit, based on a lit review maybe, but like how much of those contextual factors do you think people can or should kind of catch up front? Like, and you would understand, oh, I should have just done something different because this environment is different. I feel like a lot of times it's fairly superficial, the level of kind of comparison we do, and say like, well, this was a city in the US and that's a city in the US, or this was, an email campaign and that was an email campaign. To what extent do you think that it's that analysis, you can kind of account for that up front?
I don't think that we have enough history, and I don't know if the library of research is big enough to really adequately prepare for all those contexts and situations. So I don't blame researchers for, at some point, as you said, you kind of have to take a guess. You are going to rely on your own instincts, your own experience, your own biases, your own perspectives, your own diagnosis of what you think might work. And I'm okay with that right now, with the hope that we'll build a better, more sophisticated body of evidence that breaks out context. Medical science, God, what was it? I read that I think the very first studies done on hormone therapy for birth rates, to help women become more fertile, were done with men, white men, because those were the subjects that were available. And you think, holy Hannah, how could they do that?
Slightly different context there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Insane. But that's what they had available. And I think that maybe one of the lessons that we have today is we need to just expand that basis. We need to expand our understanding.
And I think that what is going on today is actually a lot of that. I think we're getting into some of the research that's going on is understanding those different contexts. And it's one of the things I think the replication studies that are going on are really important. And there's been a lot of focus on, all the replication failures. And I don't want to think about them as failures. And we just had a conversation with Gary Latham. So actually, by the time this probably it's out, we'll have that episode out. And he talked about this too, is this idea that, because something fails to replicate, it doesn't mean that you take that baby and throw it out with the bathwater. It just gives you insight into maybe there's some contextual differences in that replication, and what does that mean? So now you're getting to that more specific understanding of when this works, when this doesn't work. And that's the thing, as Tim said, we don't have enough history on that, but I'm hopeful, and I'm seeing more and more of that happen in the research community, where we're actually doing replication studies now. We're doing those a lot more often. We're actually looking at maybe some contextual differences and how that plays out. So I'm hopeful in the long run that we can be better at that. But at this point, yeah, it's a guess. It's a gut feel, right? Hey, here we go.
Yeah, I mean, I think those are good answers. And it's just something that I've been thinking about a fair amount lately, as we obviously our profession is one that looks at decision making, and we're always like, where's a key moment where people are making a decision and you could potentially influence their, behavior one way or another. And it seems like for our own field, like that is definitely one of them, of like, how do we decide what things we're going to try? Right. But yeah, I mean,
what's your hypothesis on this?
Yeah, no, I mean, I largely agree. I mean, like we've kind of said not to basically take one kind of like finding and sort of say like, this is kind of gospel, and, sort of build a body of evidence and look for things that replicate in a variety of contexts, but also to think a little bit more sort of holistically about, in a certain, it kind of is almost like, I posed this question to some other folks recently, where I was like, do you consider every time you're doing something starting from scratch or not? Mm. And they were kind of like, well, no, we sort of say these things are pretty similar, so we're just going to assume that they are the same, basically, is the assumption. And I think it's more work, sort of. I mean, maybe it's more work up front. It might save you time in the long run. But I think I try to approach it a little bit more as though like you're kind of starting from scratch every time, and like understanding some of like the kind of basics. And the example that I like to use, like Rory Sutherland's just like kind of eminently quotable. And so I like the example that he used in a conversation that Erik and I had with him a couple months ago. He was like talking about the jam study, and it's like, oh, does it replicate here or there, whatever. And he was like, well, yeah, it's probably different if you're just like in the supermarket and you're like running through trying to grab milk and whatever before you get home, versus like you drove 30 minutes to go to a store called World of Jam.
Yeah.
It's like, oh yeah, obviously. And so I think that there are lots of cases where you wouldn't expect things to replicate, but starting with a little bit more sort of like basic review of the context, which I mean it is part of a lot of those models, but I don't know to what extent we sort of take a few shortcuts there ourselves and say like, oh, this is pretty similar, so I think pretty similar ends up meaning we treat it the same. you know.
Yeah.
And as you pointed out, Kurt, like there's so much nuance to it that like pretty similar could be completely different.
Yeah. Well, one of the famous replication studies that didn't work, and we actually had a conversation with Cialdini about this, but it was off the air, so this is brand new stuff. But was the aging John Barge work on old priming people for old age words like Florida and all those things, and then they would walk slower down the hallway to turn their paper in, and that study was like groundbreaking and all the stuff and had all this publicity about it. And then when they tried to replicate it, it didn't work. And so, we were talking with Cialdini about this, and he was talking like, well, we don't know if maybe the color of the walls in the first study were different than the color of the walls in the second study. And we know that color can influence how people think. Or was there a poster on the wall in one and not in the other? And to your point, which is both wonderful because it's crazy and you're going, wow, the color of the wall is going to influence and change all of this, and or a poster. And then it's also really scary because you're going, well, how freaking nuanced do we get? And all right, so the temperature in the room was 2 degrees different. And so does that then invalidate? So it only works in temperatures from 72 degrees to 74 degrees. And so how specific do we get? And so then does it really matter in any of this? Can we draw these broader conclusions and make these broad general statements, which is what we're trying to do. We're trying to say, here's how humans interact and respond based upon these factors. But if those factors are so damn specific that it's, every single institution is, or every single instance is its own unique instance, and as you said, we have to start from scratch every single time, well, then it doesn't really, who cares?
Yeah, I mean, I think in particular, as if you're working with an organization that has to prioritize, which is pretty much every organization, then that would kind of lead you to just doing things that you think are going to have a bigger effect or not be as nuanced, right? I mean, I kind of, as you were describing that, I was sort of thinking of you might have seen these like sort of bespoke like vitamin kits, and it's like, oh, we like send us like a saliva sample, and maybe there's something to this, I don't actually know, but it's like, send us your saliva sample or whatever, and we'll give you this blend that's perfect for you, whatever. And it's like, okay, well, is that better than just like taking a multivitamin or like doing like 20 squats a day or what, like there maybe are other things that you could prioritize above this sort of like really specific thing where it's like, oh yeah, I take this, tailored vitamin kit, but I also like eat terrible food and get hammered every weekend or something. It's like, yeah, there's probably bigger things you could focus on that are like higher value and are going to like, quote unquote, like replicate, right, in more scenarios than sort of like hyper specific, like a word or something like that.
It is an interesting thing, and Tim and I have talked about this a lot, is with the advent of AI and machine learning and the ability to customize some of these interventions down to some pretty damn specific, excuse me, I keep using damn, I don't know why.
We'll mark this as explicit.
This podcast is not for children, yeah.
Oh, man. But we're getting to the ability to mirror and to marry the behavioral science with some of this machine learning and getting down to a very specific piece. And we had a conversation with Chris Dobbins, who works at the, Tim, where does he work again? NSA, so the big spy agency that we have here. And he's talking about customizing people's their reward and recognition packages such that you're giving you exactly what you want and Tim exactly what he wants and Erik exactly what he wants, down to some really unique identifiable characteristics. And it gets to be a little scary too when you think about that. And there's some ethical components of, so how specific, so I take a saliva thing from you and now I'm going to be able to look by your DNA and be able to say, you're going to be influenced by X, Y, and Z. And so let's go and we'll influence you via very specific targeted messages and different pieces to that. So
yeah, I mean,
don't know.
It's interesting to think about. I mean, I like kind of the promise of, and there's certainly a lot of power too, to like these kind of tailored things. And I think like the first version of that, like the first iteration of that, will still be these sort of like broader, things that we think will work in more context, right? I mean, whenever anyone, so inevitably when I talk to somebody who's kind of new to behavioral science, or I'm explaining my job or the field, they're like, whoa, this is like mind control. And if you use like your website to like, recommend things, it's like, yeah, okay, sure. But like, think about like Amazon. It's like, oh, did you buy like a toilet seat? Well, you're not becoming a toilet seat collector. But the next thing you get from them is an email that's like, would you like 50 more toilet seats? We think that you're like interested in. It's like, yeah, no, So there is certainly like still like a lot of room to kind of grow, but it's interesting to think about like where that could be useful too.
Well, and you have to wonder in 20 years how much more sophisticated those types of things will be. And we worry about that. I worry about that, at least from an ethical perspective, and our sense of free will, our sense of autonomy. Will we be manipulated, as you said, these people, oh, you're manipulating mind control over these people. You know what? I think there is that fear, and there is a real potentiality that there's some of that coming down the line, and we need to be thinking about that as behavioral scientists today, in order to really prepare ourselves and to be conscious. As Tim said, it's that awareness of things, and just being aware of the potential negative outcomes or the unintended consequences of some of the work that we're doing, and how that can get applied.
Yeah, those folks actually tried to chase me down the hallway, but I just whispered Florida cream of wheat into their ear, and I was able to get away.
So let's say someone, is new to behavioral gurus, or introducing them via this episode. What are some of your favorite episodes, and like, what are some of the most interesting, revealing, surprising interviews that you've had that resonated with you as someone who's done a lot of those? It might be a good place for people to start if they want to check out the show.
Well, I'm going to steal all of Kurt's favorites, so that he doesn't have any left. I'll give you my top three. The first is Annie Duke.
Damn! There goes one.
Because we ended up kind of going down a rabbit hole of her advisor, Lila Gleitman, that ended up just being the coolest conversation. It was just really, really cool. And it's something that she doesn't talk about. That's not like part of her main thing. So it was really revealing. The second one was George Lowenstein. And George and I have worked together for 7 years on projects. Like I know George well, and I know him well enough to know that he hates doing podcasts. He hates the idea of being recorded. Not just a little bit of, oh, that's uncomfortable, but he hates it. And so to get George into a podcast situation was absolutely terrific. And we have to thank Linda Babcock for that.
Yeah.
And then the third would be Bob Cialdini, because we ran into him at a conference in New York, I think it was, and, ended up checking out of the hotel at literally the same time, and walked from our hotel to the conference together, and ended up striking up a conversation that ended up to be so seamless when we finally made arrangements to actually get together and do the podcast recording. It was like a continuation of a conversation, thinking, holy Hannah, this guy is, he does, 50 interviews a week, and he acted like this is just the easiest and simplest and most natural thing to do, to have a conversation with you, with Kurt and me. It was a great example of how to be cool, as far as plus great content. Kurt, what do you think?
You stole all my thunder. Damn you again. Damn. I mean, make sure this was flagged. Here we go. No, I think there's been lots of great episodes. Tim,
those are the only three.
Those are the only three. Yeah. I mean, if, we have 150, I could go, 148 of them, 2 of them probably not so much, but the action design one that we did, that was great. We had these two guys on.
That was a pretty legendary conversation.
Zarak and Erik, they were awesome. And then there was the one with Charlotte Blank, who I think Zarak knows and might be his boss. There you go. That was awesome.
I'm sure that one was very good.
Conversations
Are you
with the
listening,
Merits
Charlotte?
team.
That one was great.
Charlotte, that was awesome.
Conversations with the Merits team are always just so top notch.
I mean, it was great. No, it seriously, those are great ones. But I will go in adding on to what Tim said. We interviewed Caroline Webb, who was the author of How to Have a Great Day. And again, the conversation and the insights, the very tangible takeaways for people to say, here are some things that you can do in order to apply some behavioral science principles in your everyday life. How do you become better at what you're doing and having a more fulfilling, happy life? And we ended up talking, what's the
Burning Man.
Burning Man. Thank you. See, this is why we operate well, because as Tim and I have talked, I have a booba brain, and Tim has a kiki brain on memory of names and studies and everything else. So Caroline Webb is one. I think we've done a lot of interviews with practitioners, and so people who are in business, who are actually actively applying behavioral science into their world. And I think those are fantastic. A couple that come to mind are, Charlotte was one, obviously. I'm looking now, I'm drawing a blank on my head. Chris Dobbins, who is from the NSA, James Brewer, who is from Lilly. Some of those are really good. Some of those are in our earlier stuff. We've been doing a series on COVID-19 and behavioral science response to that, which was a Pandora's box that we opened up, and oh my God, but some of the insights that we've gotten from some of the people have been really fantastic. And probably by the time that this episode is out, it's not out right now as we're talking, but I'm sure this will be out, as Gary Latham, who is one of my all-time heroes in this field. He's the author of goal setting theory, along with Ed Locke. Has been working since the 1960s doing research. And we were just so thrilled to be able to talk to him. And man, again, this down to earth, telling really funny stories about his research and eating computer paper because he made a bet with one of his research assistants that will never happen, right? We're going to do the study and I'll eat the computer paper that you printed out on if this comes out this way. And he said I had to eat the computer paper. So
a man of his word.
I don't know if he actually did, but he said it tasted bad. So we'll there you go.
Sounds
so
believable.
I think, yeah. And again, every episode, I think there's some value, as you guys know, right? You get something out of it. You get some insight, whether that be groundbreaking or just a little nuanced, different perspective. And that's the beauty of doing a podcast, as Tim and I have talked about with ourselves, and I think with others. We do this for our listeners and for the audience, but man, we get so much out of it that even if we only had, one listener, if only our moms would listen or our wives, we'd still do it because it's so intrinsically rewarding for us. I think it's great.
I think that comes through in the finished versions as well. So we're coming up in the end of our time here. I think there's a great playlist for folks who are getting an intro to behavioral grooves. So maybe let's hear from both of you as to where people can kind of connect with you or follow you. Obviously subscribe to Behavioral Grooves, but if there's, a Twitter or anything like that, and then also just what you're grooving on these days. So Kurt, maybe we'll start with you.
To borrow a segment from your show, let's discuss some grooves.
Yeah.
So obviously, can connect through www.behavioralgrooves.com. My Twitter is @whatmotivates, and so I'm on Twitter a lot. LinkedIn, obviously, just Kurt Nelson. You can search that, and there with the Lantern Group. And so there's that. And grooving, are you guys talking music? Because this is the part of the show that we didn't talk about here, but Tim brought in this idea of thinking behavioral grooves meant like grooves in an album, and it's this musical connotation when we came up with the brand. And I was thinking, no, it's like the grooves that built in after habits in your brain. And so, no, it's not about music. What are you talking about? But Tim won, and so we talk music pretty much every episode. So on my playlist, I've been grooving to Flora Cash lately, and to some various different. Angus and Julia Stone are still some of my mainstays, and my new favorite is Seawolf, who is a single guy out of LA, and he goes by the moniker Seawolf, who has had some great music and a new album that just came out in the middle of the pandemic. And so I'm sure it's not getting nearly the publicity and need that happens, but listen to those guys if that's what you're grooving on.
That's a good tip. I like Seawolf. I hadn't heard anything from him in a long time. The last time I saw him, I saw a live show probably 8 years ago or something like that at a really tiny venue in Chapel Hill, North Carolina.
Oh yeah, he's fantastic.
Like 15 people there, but
yeah, brand new album out, and two of my favorite. I've loved him for a long time, but two of my brand new favorite songs are off this new album.
Cool.
So, yeah,
we'll definitely check it out. Tim, how about you?
Tim Houlihan on LinkedIn, at T Houlihan on Twitter, and check out the Behavioral Groove site. I'm keeping with my pre-1978 moniker that Kurt likes to apply to me. I've actually been listening to sort of more emotional stuff. So I've actually kind of been digging on Debussy, because I just think he absolutely gets the emotional rendering of the piano particularly well. I've also been listening to Marvin Gaye's What's Going On album, which, man, if there's ever something that's so appropriate in this time of upheaval, I think that's it. And Ella Fitzgerald's Live in Berlin 1960. If you have any interest in just having your nervous system shocked with delight, just check out Ella Fitzgerald.
That's
So
great.
don't you love how Tim describes us? I just mentioned stuff, and
It's great.
the emotive words that he uses when he talks about music. And I do have to throw a plug in, because you guys, along with some people from Ideas 42 and some others, we've put together, and it'll probably be out shortly.
It probably will be out by the time this is released.
Yeah, a whole behavioral science playlist. So
that's right. Shout out to Aline for pulling all that together. Aline Holsworth at Center for Advanced Science site. And that should be on Spotify.
I'm excited to see that finished product.
That'll be Spotify, and it's taking your songs and what's the behavioral twist to them, and dissecting some of their lyrics. It's a cool project. It was a really cool project.
Very fun.
It was pretty fun. Yeah. How about you, Zarak? What are you grooving on?
Yeah. I went back to like an old band that I listened to a lot, actually right around the time that I saw the Seawolf show, but band from North Carolina called Megafaun. And so it's like so originally it was like Justin Vernon, Bon Iver, that guy. So it was like his kind of crew that settled in Raleigh and Durham, North Carolina. And so at the time, I think they've become kind of pretty famous now, like relatively speaking, in like folk area. But yeah, so it's like Phil Cook, Bradley Cook, and they unfortunately, they took, I know you guys aren't Spotify fans necessarily, but they took their stuff off of Spotify and have, so I've been listening to it on YouTube for now, but Megafaun is what I've been grooving to. How about you, Eric?
Since we've entered quarantine, what I found like really helpful in kind of getting through a lot of the, somewhat isolation and also just a lack of concerts for the foreseeable future is I've just been watching a lot of live shows on YouTube or other websites that have live shows. It's been really nice because I love going to shows, and, obviously I can't go to one now, and I don't foresee one happening in the near future. And just without having as much social stuff going on, it just provides a little bit of like feeling of like, you're not there, but it's like a nice change of just like listening to something on our headphones. So I've just really been like scouring YouTube, and I'll look up artists that I like seeing live and just find a random show on there. I'm trying to think of any particular ones. Radiohead's been dropping a bunch of like archive shows on YouTube that have been really cool. There's been some really good ones on that. I've been into kind of like Wilco lately. Wilco's got a lot of good live shows up there. Wilco's a documentary. It was actually free last week on some other website, and I watched that, and that was cool.
That was the last live show I saw before quarantine.
Wow, lucky you. That's a good one.
It was very
what else is there? I watched a couple of good shows by The National. My Morning Jacket's one of my favorite bands. I think they're like the best live band out there. They've released some stuff. But yeah, that's kind of what I've been into is watch like at night I'll like read a book or do some work or something. I'll like Chromecast a show onto my TV and just kind of let that play, or even like Friday or Saturday night just find some live show and play, and it gives a little bit of like extra energy than just typical listening to music on the headphones, and fulfills a little bit of that need. So yeah.
One of my greatest regrets is not being able to see Billy Bragg with Wilco. That would be to me, that would just be a fantastic show. But
yeah.
I think I missed the window on that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm starting to get to where like some of the shows I was planning and excited to see are coming up that were supposed to be happening and aren't. So I think I'm going to like tomorrow I was originally supposed to go see this like producer DJ called Catronado that I like a lot. And obviously that got canceled for the foreseeable future. But tomorrow night I'm just going to like pull up a live show that he has on YouTube and just use that to sort of like, mark the event. So that'll be our next behavioral science playlist, is like YouTube live shows or something like that.
Yeah, because we're stuck indoors and at home. But
speaking of your 70s, you mentioned the 70s. I found some pretty cool Eagles ones from the 70s that are up there. So they're super 70s, just like the like crowd and everything is just like straight out of like the mid 70s. Not that I was there, but it gives me that feeling of that. Yeah.
Oh. Yeah, it's crazy how we adapt in this time and we find those things. But Erik, I think that's great to live stream or get these concerts to fill that need that we have, because we have a need to kind of see things and live. That's why entertainment is so valuable. So
I also look at those concert videos and go, what the hell are all those people doing standing next to each other?
I know. It's so jarring now. I like watch TV shows and people give like handshakes. I'm just like, no, stop. Like, what? That's not how this works. Oh yeah. Our social norms have changed very quickly for sure.
Yeah. It's interesting. It's one of the topics we cover in the coronavirus series. And what norms, what habits are going to stick and what aren't? It's a big question. It'll be interesting to see. As we said, we're in the midst of a huge experiment that nobody wanted to be in, but we're all in, and it'll be interesting to see what we learn from it.
Yeah, definitely. Cool. I think we're just about past our time here. So any other like parting thoughts or things you guys want to cover before we take off here?
Keep on grooving.
Yeah, action design rocks. There you go.
Action grooves. I mean,
action grooves. Yeah.
Whenever we get together,
I do want to, try to think of a better crossover though than Scooby Doo and Abbott and Costello. Yeah, we need. I
don't think like really any of those are flattering for anybody.
I don't know. He-Man and I'm showing my age here, so I don't know. Anyway,
what was like the Marvel movie, like Infinity War? That was like a big crossover,
where you got everybody, all the different ones.
Yeah, everyone in the behavioral universe.
Yeah, the behavioral universe is uniting with the the behavioral stones for power. Yeah,
we're a super group, the super groups of the 70s.
Yeah. But awesome. Well, it's just super fun. Glad we got to finally get around to do this. I think we'll definitely have to keep doing this over, occasionally and do some cross episodes.
Just check in. Yeah, that's awesome.
And definitely recommend everybody checks out the Behavioral Group show if you have not already. There's a ton of great content on there. You guys have a lot of cool stuff coming out since we've kind of been in quarantine as well. So I have a lot of stuff to catch up on there myself. So I'm a little behind on my podcast without as much commuting and things like that. I found I need to shift my habits around trying to get my podcast fix in.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys for having us. We appreciate it.
Yeah, we loved it. I loved it. And thanks very much for the reciprocation. Appreciate it.
This was great. Awesome. We'll see you next time.
Great. Thank you guys so much. We'll talk to you soon and see everybody next time.
Thank you for listening. That concludes this edition of Action Design Radio, hosted by Erik Johnson and Zarak Khan. All podcast episodes are available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and many other platforms where you might typically get your pod on. And don't forget to follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Special thanks to Morgan Bortz for design, and as always, we would like to recognize Steve Wendell, founder of the Action Design Network, a nonprofit organization dedicated to spreading awareness about behavioral economics, psychology, and all things behavioral science in order to help you improve your life, your career, and your understanding of the world around us and the people in it. I am your producer and audio engineer, Zach Simon. For more cutting-edge behavioral science content, visit action-design.org. Once again, that's action-design.org. There, you can sign up for our newsletter and find an in-person event happening near you. We have chapters in over a dozen cities in the United States and Canada. Also, on our website, you can find additional notes and links regarding the topics discussed in today's episode. Thank you again for tuning in, and we will see you again soon.